Monday morning in downtown Chicago felt different somehow. The March wind whipped off Lake Michigan with unusual intensity, and the elevator in Meridian Industries' 60-story headquarters seemed to climb slower than usual. I'd been making this same commute for nearly a decade, but something in the air felt charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My office on the 42nd floor overlooked the trading floor, a sea of monitors and controlled chaos where millions of dollars changed hands every second. The algorithms I'd designed and refined over 8 years were the invisible engines driving much of that activity. Every buy order, every sell signal, every microsecond timing advantage that gave Meridian its edge in high-frequency trading, it all flowed through systems I'd architected with obsessive precision. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to discuss my future while watching the fruits of my labor generate profits in real time below. Angela Winter's office was on the 45th floor, nestled between the executive suites and the legal department. She joined Meridian 3 months earlier from Goldman Sachs, brought in by CEO Harrison Blake as part of his efficiency optimization initiative. The corporate speak was transparent, cost-cutting disguised as strategic planning, when I knocked on her door at exactly 9 a.m., Angela was reviewing a thick file folder. She looked up with the practiced smile of someone who delivered difficult news professionally. "Nathan, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." I settled into the chair across from her desk, noting the carefully arranged papers that suggested this conversation had been planned in detail. Through her window, I could see the morning sun reflecting off the glass facades of neighboring skyscrapers, each one housing competitors who would love access to Meridian's proprietary trading algorithms. "I'll get straight to the point," Angela began, closing the folder. "The executive committee has made some decisions about organizational structure, particularly regarding our technology leadership roles." The phrase organizational structure was corporate euphemism for layoffs, but my position seemed secure. Meridian's trading algorithms were industry-leading, generating consistent profits even during market volatility. I was the only person who fully understood the system's architecture, from the machine learning models that predicted price movements to the execution engines that capitalized on those predictions. "We're bringing in some fresh perspectives to work alongside our existing talent," she continued. "The board feels that knowledge transfer and redundancy planning are crucial for our continued success." Knowledge transfer was another euphemism, this one more ominous. In the technology world, knowledge transfer typically meant one thing: training your replacement. "What kind of fresh perspectives?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Angela opened a different folder, revealing a resume with a photo of a young man who looked barely old enough to have graduated college. Derek Walsh, MIT graduate, summa cum laude in computer science and applied mathematics. He's been doing quantitative analysis at Renaissance Technologies for the past 2 years. Renaissance Technologies was legendary in the quantitative trading world, known for hiring the brightest mathematical minds and paying them astronomical salaries. If Derek Walsh had worked there, he was undoubtedly talented. But 2 years of experience, regardless of pedigree, couldn't compare to 8 years of building and refining trading systems in live market conditions. "Derek will be joining us as senior quantitative developer," Angela continued. "We'd like you to work with him on transitioning some of your responsibilities." The word transitioning hung in the air like a threat. I'd seen this movie before at other firms: hire a younger, cheaper replacement, have the veteran train them, then eliminate the higher salary. The only surprise was that it was happening to me. "What's the timeline for this transition?" I asked. 6 weeks. We want Derek fully operational on the core trading systems by the end of April. 6 weeks to transfer 8 years of accumulated knowledge, institutional memory, and system-specific expertise. It was an impossible timeline, which suggested that Meridian's leadership either didn't understand the complexity of what I'd built or didn't care about the consequences of rushing the transition. "Angela, with respect, 6 weeks isn't realistic. The trading algorithms alone have over 400,000 lines of code, plus machine learning models that took years to train and optimize. The risk management systems require a deep understanding of market dynamics and regulatory requirements. Derek might be brilliant, but," she held up a hand, cutting me off. "Nathan, I understand your concerns, but this decision comes from the highest levels of the organization." Harrison Blake himself reviewed the transition plan. Harrison Blake had been Meridian's CEO for 18 months, recruited from a traditional investment bank with little understanding of algorithmic trading's technical complexities. His background was in relationship management and deal-making. Skills that were valuable but irrelevant to the mathematical precision required for quantitative trading systems. Has Mr. Blake considered the risks involved in rushing this transition? The trading algorithms handle over $50 billion in daily volume. A single coding error or misunderstood parameter could result in catastrophic losses. Angela's expression remained professionally neutral. The executive team is confident that with proper documentation and knowledge transfer, the transition can be completed safely within the established timeline. Her response revealed the fundamental disconnect between Meridian's leadership and operational reality. Proper documentation could capture system architecture and basic functionality, but it couldn't transfer the intuitive understanding that came from years of monitoring market conditions, adjusting algorithms in real time, and developing the instinctive feel for when something wasn't working correctly. What happens to my role after the transition is complete? We're still finalizing those details. There may be opportunities in other areas of the organization, or we might discuss a consulting arrangement for ongoing support. Both options were polite ways of saying I'd be terminated once Derek could handle the basic functions. Consulting arrangements typically lasted a few months at reduced compensation before being eliminated entirely. I left Angela's office with a mixture of anger and disbelief. 8 years of building Meridian's most profitable division, of working 60-hour weeks to optimize trading performance, of generating nearly $1 billion in annual profits, and my reward was training my replacement so they could eliminate my position. The elevator ride back to my office felt interminable. When the doors opened on the 42nd floor, I could hear the familiar hum of the trading floor below, the sound of my algorithms executing thousands of transactions per second. Each trade generated a small profit, and those small profits accumulated into the massive revenues that funded executive bonuses and shareholder dividends. Derek Walsh arrived the following Monday, carrying a brand new laptop and the eager enthusiasm of someone who'd never experienced corporate betrayal. He was 26 years old, impeccably dressed, and undeniably intelligent. Under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed mentoring him. Mr. Peterson, it's an honor to work with you, he said, extending his hand with genuine respect. I've read about your work on market microstructure modeling. The papers you published on latency optimization are legendary in the quant community. His admiration was sincere, which made the situation more uncomfortable. Derek wasn't the villain in this scenario, he was simply a talented young professional taking what seemed like a career opportunity. The real villains were the executives who decided that institutional knowledge was disposable. Call me Nathan, I replied, shaking his hand. Angela mentioned that you're here to learn about our trading systems. Yes, sir. I'm excited to contribute to the team's success. Renaissance Technologies was an amazing experience, but Meridian's algorithms have a reputation for consistency that's unmatched in the industry. Derek's enthusiasm was infectious, despite the circumstances. He'd clearly done his homework, studying Meridian's public performance data and understanding our competitive advantages. His technical questions during our first day together revealed a sophisticated understanding of quantitative trading principles, but understanding principles and implementing systems were vastly different challenges. Derek could discuss arbitrage theory and statistical modeling with impressive fluency, but he'd never built a system that executed millions of trades daily in live market conditions. He'd never experienced the 3 a.m. phone calls when algorithms detected unusual market patterns, or the split-second decisions required when trading halts threatened to trigger cascading losses. The first week of training covered basic system architecture. I walked Derek through the main components: data ingestion systems that process thousands of market feeds simultaneously, pattern recognition algorithms that identified trading opportunities, execution engines that placed orders within microseconds of signal generation, and risk management systems that prevented catastrophic losses. Derek absorbed information rapidly, taking detailed notes and asking thoughtful questions. His MIT education was evident in his ability to grasp complex mathematical concepts quickly. But I could see confusion when I discussed the subtle adjustments and workarounds that kept the systems running smoothly. Why does the momentum algorithm use this particular threshold for volatility filtering? He asked, pointing to a section of code that had been modified dozens of times over the years. Originally, it used a standard statistical threshold, I explained. But during the 2018 market correction, we discovered that normal volatility measures weren't adequate for detecting regime changes. This modified threshold incorporates additional factors that better predict when momentum strategies should be paused. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Derek nodded, but I could see he was struggling to understand why the modification was necessary. The change represented years of observation and experimentation, the kind of institutional knowledge that couldn't be conveyed through documentation alone. The second week focused on the machine learning models that powered our most profitable strategies. These algorithms had been trained on 8 years of market data, learning to recognize patterns that human analysts might miss. The models were constantly evolving, incorporating new data and adjusting to changing market conditions. The training process took over 6 months initially, I explained as we reviewed the model architecture. But ongoing optimization requires constant monitoring and periodic retraining. Market dynamics change constantly, and models that worked last year might be useless next month. Derek struggled with this concept. His Renaissance Technologies experience had involved working with established models rather than building them from scratch. He understood the mathematical theory behind machine learning but had never experienced the iterative process of developing models for live trading environments. How do you decide when a model needs retraining? He asked. Experience, mostly. You develop a feel for when performance metrics start degrading, or when market conditions shift in ways that might affect model accuracy. There are statistical measures we track, but ultimately it requires judgment that comes from years of observation. I could see Derek taking notes frantically, trying to capture decision-making processes that were more art than science. His technical competence was unquestionable, but the experiential knowledge that made the systems truly effective couldn't be transferred in 6 weeks. The third week covered risk management systems, arguably the most critical component of the entire architecture. These systems monitored every trade in real time, detecting anomalies that could indicate problems with the trading algorithms. They could halt trading instantly if losses exceeded predetermined thresholds or if market conditions became too volatile. For safe operation. Risk management is what separates successful algorithmic trading from gambling, I told Derek as we reviewed the system specifications. The algorithms are designed to be profitable over time, but they can produce significant short-term losses if market conditions change rapidly. These systems prevent those short-term losses from becoming catastrophic. Derek understood the concept but struggled with implementation details. The risk management systems incorporated dozens of variables, from individual position sizes to overall portfolio exposure. The thresholds and parameters had been refined through years of experience, including several near disasters that had taught valuable lessons about systemic risk. What happens if the risk management system detects a problem during active trading hours? Derek asked. Depends on the severity. Minor issues might trigger alerts that allow manual intervention. Major problems result in automatic trading halts while human operators assess the situation. The system is designed to err on the side of caution, better to miss profitable opportunities than to risk catastrophic losses. I walked Derek through several historical examples where the risk management systems had prevented significant losses. Each case represented lessons learned through experience, situations that couldn't be anticipated through theoretical analysis alone. By the fourth week, Derek was beginning to understand the system's complexity, but his confidence was shaking. He'd initially approached the training with the assurance of someone who'd mastered quantitative trading at one of the world's most prestigious firms. Now he was confronting the reality that building and maintaining systems was far more challenging than using established tools. Nathan, I have to be honest, he said during our Thursday afternoon session. This is much more complex than I anticipated. At Renaissance, I worked with existing models and systems. I've never had to understand every component from the ground up. His admission was both refreshing and concerning. Derek's honesty suggested he understood the magnitude of what he was being asked to learn, but it also confirmed my suspicions about the unrealistic timeline Meridian had established. Derek, you're learning faster than anyone could reasonably expect, I assured him. But you're right that 6 weeks isn't sufficient. These systems represent 8 years of development and refinement. Even with perfect knowledge transfer, you'd need months of hands-on experience before you could operate them independently. What should I tell Angela? She's been asking for progress reports, and I don't want to seem incompetent. The question revealed Derek's precarious position. He'd been hired to replace me, but he was beginning to understand that he wasn't ready for that responsibility. If he admitted his limitations to management, he might lose the opportunity. If he overstated his readiness, he could be set up for failure with catastrophic consequences. Tell her the truth, I advised. The systems are more complex than initially anticipated, and additional time would be beneficial for ensuring a smooth transition. Derek nodded, but I could see his internal conflict. He wanted to succeed, but he was smart enough to recognize the risks involved in rushing the process. The conversation planted a seed of an idea that would grow over the following days. If Meridian's leadership was determined to rush this transition, Despite obvious risks, perhaps they needed to understand the potential consequences more clearly. Derek was a talented professional who deserved better than being set up for failure, and Meridian stakeholders deserved better than reckless cost-cutting. That threatened the company's most profitable division. That evening, I sat in my home office reviewing the day's training notes. My house in Lincoln Park was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic on Lakeshore Drive. I'd bought the house with bonuses earned from successful trading algorithm development, a tangible reminder of the value I'd created for Meridian Industries. As I reviewed Derek's questions and concerns, I realized that documenting the training process was creating a detailed record of how unprepared he was for independent operation. Every confused question, every misunderstood concept, every admission of inexperience was evidence that Meridian was rushing toward a potentially disastrous transition. The documentation would be valuable if anyone ever questioned whether adequate training had been provided. But more immediately, it was highlighting the gap between Derek's current capabilities and the responsibilities he was expected to assume. I opened my laptop and began drafting a detailed memo outlining the risks associated with the accelerated transition timeline. The memo would document Derek's progress honestly while highlighting areas where additional training would be beneficial. If Meridian chose to proceed despite these warnings, at least there would be a record that proper concerns had been raised. But as I wrote, a different idea began forming. What if there was a way to ensure that Meridian's leadership truly understood the consequences of their decisions? What if the risks I was documenting could be demonstrated rather than simply described? The algorithms I'd built were worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually to Meridian Industries. But they were also worth similar amounts to competitors. Who would love access to that technology? And thanks to non-compete agreements and intellectual property protections, those competitors couldn't simply hire me away to recreate the systems elsewhere unless, of course, Meridian terminated my employment and freed me from those contractual obligations. As the idea crystallized, I realized that training Derek might be the least important aspect of the coming weeks. Far more significant might be the phone call I'd make the day after Meridian decided my services were no longer required. A call that would change everything for everyone involved. The 5th week of Derek's training coincided with one of the most volatile market periods in recent memory. The Federal Reserve had announced an unexpected interest rate decision, sending shockwaves through global financial markets. Within minutes, trading volume spiked to levels that tested even the most robust algorithmic systems. I was monitoring the algorithms from my workstation when the first anomaly appeared. The momentum strategy was generating unusually aggressive buy signals for semiconductor stocks, positions that seemed inconsistent with the broader market sell-off. Under normal circumstances, I would have made immediate adjustments to the model parameters, fine-tuning the sensitivity to prevent overcapitalization on what appeared to be a false signal. Derek was at the adjacent workstation, watching the real-time displays with fascination and growing concern. "Nathan, why is the semiconductor strategy behaving differently from the others? The correlations don't make sense given the Fed announcement." His question demonstrated both his analytical skills and his inexperience. The semiconductor anomaly wasn't a malfunction, it was the algorithm responding to subtle patterns that weren't immediately obvious to human observers. The strategy had detected early institutional buying that suggested certain semiconductor companies would benefit from the Fed's policy changes, positioning Meridian ahead of the broader market recognition. "The algorithm is working correctly," I explained, pulling up the detailed analytics. "It's identifying a sector rotation that's happening faster than most human traders can recognize. The semiconductor positions will likely be profitable once the market processes the full implications of the Fed decision." Derek studied the screens intently, trying to understand the logic behind the algorithm's choices. "How can you be so confident? The positions seem counterintuitive given the overall market reaction." "Experience," I replied. "I've seen similar patterns during previous Fed announcements. The algorithm has been trained on years of data that include these types of market disruptions. It's learned to recognize opportunities that emerge during periods of high volatility." Within 2 hours, Derek's skepticism transformed into amazement as the semiconductor positions generated nearly $12 million in profits. The algorithm had correctly anticipated the sector rotation, positioning Meridian to capitalize on institutional flows that didn't become apparent to most market participants until much later in the trading session. "That was incredible," Derek said as we reviewed the day's performance. "But I have to admit, I never would have trusted those signals if I'd been operating independently. How do you develop that level of confidence in the system's decisions?" His question highlighted the fundamental challenge with the accelerated training timeline. Derek could understand the mathematical principles behind the algorithms, but he lacked the experiential foundation necessary to trust the system's counterintuitive recommendations. That trust took years to develop and couldn't be transferred through documentation or classroom instruction. It's accumulated experience, I told him honestly. You learn to recognize when the algorithms are seeing patterns that aren't immediately obvious. But more importantly, you learn to distinguish between genuine opportunities and false signals that could lead to significant losses. Derek's expression grew troubled. Angela has been asking about my readiness to take over operations. She wants a definitive timeline for when I can work independently. The pressure from management was intensifying, despite clear evidence that Derek needed more time. I'd submitted weekly progress reports documenting his advancement while noting areas where additional training would be beneficial. The reports were detailed and honest, providing clear justification for extending the transition timeline, but Meridian's leadership seemed determined to proceed regardless of operational readiness. The cost savings from eliminating my position apparently outweighed concerns about risk management or system stability. What did you tell her? I asked. I tried to be diplomatic, but I also wanted to be honest about the complexity. I suggested that additional time would be beneficial for ensuring a smooth transition. How did she respond? Derek shifted uncomfortably. She said the timeline wasn't negotiable. The decision came from Harrison Blake personally, and he expects the transition completed by the original deadline. Harrison Blake's involvement confirmed that this decision was driven by executive mandate rather than operational considerations. Blake had been hired to reduce costs and increase profitability, metrics that looked impressive on quarterly reports but ignored long-term risks to the business. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent alert from the risk management system. One of the arbitrage strategies had detected unusual price discrepancies in the foreign exchange markets, potentially indicating technical problems with a major trading platform. The system had automatically reduced position sizes and flagged the situation for human review. I immediately accessed the detailed diagnostics, analyzing market data flows and execution patterns to determine whether the discrepancies represented genuine arbitrage opportunities or system malfunctions. The analysis required rapid interpretation of complex data streams, making decisions that could affect millions of dollars in trading positions. Derek watched intently as I worked through the diagnostic process, but I could see his confusion growing. The decision-making involved intuitive leaps based on pattern recognition that couldn't be easily explained or documented. The FX platform is experiencing latency issues, I concluded after 10 minutes of analysis. The price discrepancies are artificial, created by delayed data feeds rather than genuine arbitrage opportunities. I'm suspending the FX strategies until the platform issues are resolved. Derek reviewed my analysis, trying to understand the logic behind the decision. How can you be certain the discrepancies are artificial? The profit potential seems significant if the opportunities are genuine. Experience with similar situations. I replied. I've seen these patterns before during platform outages. The potential profits look attractive, but they're based on stale data that would result in execution at disadvantageous prices. Better to miss potential profits than to risk certain losses. My decision proved correct when the trading platform announced technical difficulties 30 minutes later. The early detection and conservative response had saved Meridian from potentially millions in losses that less experienced operators might have incurred by chasing false arbitrage signals. The incident provided a perfect example of why rushing Derek's transition was dangerous. He had the analytical skills to understand the situation eventually, but he lacked the instantaneous pattern recognition necessary for real-time risk management. In volatile markets, that delay could be catastrophic. That evening, I received an unexpected phone call from Victoria Chen, a former colleague who'd left Meridian 2 years earlier to join Pinnacle Capital Management. Victoria had been one of our most talented quantitative researchers before being recruited away by Pinnacle's competitive compensation package. Nathan, I heard through the grapevine that you might be looking for new opportunities, she said after our initial pleasantries. Word traveled fast in Chicago's quantitative trading community. The fact that Victoria had heard about my situation suggested that Meridian's cost-cutting plans were becoming industry knowledge. Nothing's been finalized yet, I replied carefully. But there have been some organizational changes that might affect my role. I thought you might be interested to know that Pinnacle is expanding their algorithmic trading division. We're looking for someone with your background to lead the development of new strategies. Pinnacle Capital Management was one of Meridian's primary competitors, a $15 billion hedge fund known for aggressive growth and competitive recruiting. They'd been trying to build algorithmic trading capabilities for years but had struggled to match the performance of Meridian's systems. That's interesting, I said, though I tried to keep my tone neutral. What kind of strategies are they considering? high-frequency arbitrage, momentum-based strategies, machine learning applications, essentially everything that's made Meridian so successful in the quantitative space. The partners are committed to building a world-class operation. Victoria's description encompassed all the areas where I had deep expertise, the same capabilities that generated hundreds of millions in annual profits for Meridian. If Pinnacle could replicate those systems, they would become a formidable competitor in the algorithmic trading space. The compensation package would be extremely competitive, Victoria continued. Base salary in the high seven figures, plus equity participation and performance bonuses. And unlike some firms, Pinnacle actually values institutional knowledge and long-term thinking. The implicit criticism of Meridian's approach was unmistakable. Victoria was clearly aware of how I was being treated and was positioning Pinnacle as an organization that wouldn't make similar mistakes. I appreciate you thinking of me, I said. If my situation at Meridian changes, I'd definitely be interested in learning more. Of course. And Nathan? If you do decide to make a change, I'd move quickly. Opportunities like this don't stay available indefinitely. After ending the call, I sat in my study contemplating the conversation's implications. Victoria's offer represented validation that my expertise was highly valued in the marketplace, despite Meridian's apparent belief that I was easily replaceable. More significantly, the offer highlighted a strategic opportunity that Meridian's leadership apparently hadn't considered. By terminating my employment, they would free me from non-compete restrictions that currently prevented competitors from accessing my knowledge and capabilities. The non-compete agreement I'd signed when joining Meridian was comprehensive, preventing me from working for competitors or starting competing businesses for 2 years after leaving the company. But the agreement included standard provisions that voided the restrictions if Meridian terminated my employment without cause. Training my replacement could arguably constitute evidence that my termination wasn't performance-related, potentially qualifying as termination without cause. If Meridian proceeded with their plan, they might inadvertently release me from the very agreements that protected their competitive advantages. The irony was perfect. Meridian's cost-cutting initiative could end up providing their biggest competitor with access to the algorithmic trading expertise that had generated nearly $1 billion in annual profits. The sixth and final week of Derek's training arrived. With increasing pressure from management, Angela Winters scheduled daily check-ins to assess progress and confirm that the transition would be completed on schedule. Her questions became more pointed, focusing on specific capabilities rather than general readiness. Can Derek operate the momentum strategies independently? She asked during Tuesday's update call. He understands the basic principles and can execute routine operations, I replied honestly. But he hasn't had enough experience with edge cases or unusual market conditions to handle complex situations independently. What about the machine learning models? Can he maintain and optimize those systems? Derek can run standard maintenance procedures, but model optimization requires deep understanding of market dynamics and algorithm behavior that takes years to develop. My responses were truthful but apparently not what Angela wanted to hear. She became increasingly frustrated with my assessments, clearly preferring simple yes or no answers about Derek's readiness. Nathan, I need to be clear about expectations, she said during Thursday's call. Derek will be assuming full responsibility for the trading systems on Monday morning. Your role will be eliminated at that time, with a standard severance package and transition period for final documentation. The announcement was delivered matter-of-factly, without acknowledgement of the risks involved or appreciation for 8 years of service. Derek would be thrown into operational responsibility with less than 6 weeks of training on systems that controlled billions of dollars in daily trading volume. Angela, I strongly recommend reconsidering this timeline, I said. Derek is talented and learning quickly, but he's not ready for independent operation of these systems. The risks to the business are significant. The decision has been made at the executive level, she replied. We're confident that adequate training has been provided and that Derek can handle the responsibilities effectively. Her confidence was misplaced, but clearly unshakable. Meridian's leadership had committed to a course of action regardless of operational consequences. Derek was visibly shaken when I told him about the timeline acceleration. We were reviewing risk management procedures when I shared Angela's announcement, and I watched his confidence evaporate in real time. Nathan, I'm not ready for this, he said quietly. I understand maybe 60% of what these systems do, and even less about how to handle problems when they arise. I know, I replied. But the decision has been made. All we can do is use the remaining time as effectively as possible. Derek spent the final 2 days asking increasingly frantic questions about edge cases and emergency procedures. He was trying To compress months of necessary learning into hours of available time, a futile effort that only heightened his anxiety about the coming responsibilities. What if the algorithms start generating unexpected losses, he asked. What if the risk management systems trigger alerts I don't understand? What if market conditions change in ways that require manual intervention? Each question highlighted gaps in his knowledge that couldn't be filled through crash courses or emergency training. Derek was a skilled professional, but he was being set up for failure by unrealistic expectations and inadequate preparation time. Friday afternoon arrived with a mixture of finality and anticipation. Derek would spend the weekend reviewing documentation and preparing for Monday's operational handover. I would clean out my office and begin the transition to whatever came next. As I packed my personal belongings, I thought about Victoria Chen's offer and the conversation that would follow Meridian's decision to terminate my employment. The call I'd been contemplating for weeks was about to become both possible and necessary. Meridian Industries was about to learn that some decisions have consequences far beyond the immediate cost savings they generate. And Derek Walsh was about to discover that being someone's replacement was vastly different from being ready for their responsibilities. The real story was just beginning. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with Lake Michigan churning under heavy clouds that matched my mood perfectly. I sat in my car in Meridian's parking garage, watching other employees hurry toward the elevators with their usual Monday urgency. Today would be different for all of them, though none realized it. My termination meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., after Derek officially assumed operational control of the trading systems. The timing was deliberate. Meridian wanted to ensure continuity of operations before severing ties with their chief architect. What they didn't realize was that continuity required far more than ceremonial handovers and signed documentation. Derek had arrived early, his nervous energy evident even from a distance. He'd called me twice over the weekend with technical questions, each conversation revealing new gaps in his understanding. The pressure was clearly affecting him, but he was trying to project confidence for management's benefit. The trading floor was already active when I reached my desk for the final time. Market opening was still 2 hours away, but pre-market activity required constant monitoring and occasional intervention. The algorithms I'd built were processing thousands of data points per second, identifying patterns and preparing trading strategies for the day ahead. Nathan, good morning, Derek said, approaching with a forced smile. I wanted to thank you again for everything you've taught me these past 6 weeks. I know this transition isn't ideal, but I'm going to do my best to maintain the standards you've established. His sincerity was genuine, which made the situation more tragic. Derek wasn't the villain in this corporate drama, he was simply a talented professional caught in a cost-cutting initiative that prioritized short-term savings over operational stability. Derek, you're more prepared than anyone could be given the timeline, I assured him. Trust your instincts, and don't hesitate to halt trading if anything seems unusual. Better to be overly cautious than to risk catastrophic losses. We spent the morning reviewing final operational procedures and emergency protocols. Derek asked detailed questions about system monitoring, alert interpretation, and escalation procedures. Each question demonstrated his growing understanding, while simultaneously revealing the enormous scope of responsibilities he was inheriting. At 9:45 a.m., Angela Winters appeared at my workstation with a security guard and an HR representative. The escort was protocol for terminated employees with access to sensitive systems, but the symbolism was unmistakable. After 8 years of building Meridian's most profitable division, I was being treated like a potential security threat. Nathan, we're ready to proceed with the transition, Angela announced formally. Derek has been granted full system access, and your credentials will be deactivated once the handover is complete. The actual handover took less than 15 minutes. Derek logged into the primary systems while I verified that all access permissions had been transferred correctly. The algorithms continued their relentless processing, indifferent to the human drama surrounding their operation. The systems are now under your control, I told Derek, logging out of my workstation for the final time. Remember what we discussed about risk management, and trust the training you've received. Derek nodded, but I could see anxiety in his eyes. He was inheriting responsibility for systems that controlled billions of dollars in daily trading volume, with less than 6 weeks of preparation for challenges that typically required years to master. The termination meeting was conducted with corporate efficiency in Angela's office. Standard severance package, COBRA benefits information, return of company property, and final signatures on documentation that officially ended my employment with Meridian Industries. Your contributions to the company have been significant, Angela said as I signed the final papers. We wish you success in your future endeavors. The platitudes felt hollow given the circumstances, but I responded politely while internally calculating the timeline for my next steps. Meridian's termination letter would serve as evidence that my departure wasn't performance-related, potentially voiding the non-compete restrictions that had protected their algorithmic trading secrets. Security escorted me to my car, a final indignity that ensured I couldn't access company systems or communicate with remaining employees. The escort was standard procedure, but it felt like punishment for 8 years of dedicated service that had generated nearly $1 billion in annual profits. I drove home through Chicago's midday traffic, processing the morning's events while planning the conversation that would reshape the competitive landscape in algorithmic trading. Victoria Chen's business card was in my wallet, along with direct contact information for Pinnacle Capital's managing partners. The call needed to be timed carefully. I wanted to give Derek a few hours to settle into his new responsibilities before triggering events that would fundamentally alter Meridian's market position. Professional courtesy suggested allowing him time to address any immediate issues before introducing additional complications. My Lincoln Park house felt unusually quiet as I settled into my home office around 1 p.m. The trading day was in full swing, with Meridian's algorithms executing thousands of transactions while Derek monitored systems he barely understood. I wondered how he was handling the pressure and whether he'd encountered any of the edge cases we discussed during training. At 2:30 p.m., I made the call that would change everything. Victoria, this is Nathan Peterson. Is that offer from Pinnacle still available? Nathan, I was hoping to hear from you. Yes, absolutely. What's your situation at Meridian? They terminated my employment this morning. Derek Walsh is now operating the trading systems with 6 weeks of training. Victoria's sharp intake of breath was audible. 6 weeks? For systems that are complex? That's corporate malpractice. It gets better. The termination letter states that my departure wasn't performance-related, which should void the non-compete restrictions in my original agreement. The silence that followed lasted nearly 10 seconds as Victoria processed the implications. Meridian had just freed their chief algorithmic architect to work for competitors, providing access to 8 years of proprietary trading system development. Nathan, I need to conference with Robert Steinberg immediately. This conversation is going to change Pinnacle's entire strategic direction. Robert Steinberg was Pinnacle Capital's founding partner, a legendary figure in Chicago's financial community known for aggressive growth strategies and competitive recruiting. If he became involved in negotiations, the conversation would move from theoretical opportunity to concrete implementation planning. Robert, I have Nathan Peterson on the line, Victoria announced after connecting the three-way call. Meridian terminated his employment this morning under circumstances that appear to void his non-compete restrictions. Mr. Peterson, Victoria has told me about your background, Steinberg said without preamble. If you're genuinely free from contractual restrictions, Pinnacle would be very interested in discussing opportunities. The termination letter indicates my departure wasn't performance-related, I confirmed. My employment attorney will need to review the documentation, but initial indications suggest the non-compete clauses may no longer apply. Excellent. Victoria, clear my schedule for this afternoon. Mr. Peterson, how quickly could you meet with our executive team? The urgency in Steinberg's voice reflected the opportunity's magnitude. Pinnacle had been trying to build algorithmic trading capabilities for years without achieving the performance levels that Meridian routinely generated. Access to my expertise could accelerate their development timeline by decades. I could meet today if necessary, I replied. But I'd want to involve my attorney in any formal discussions about employment terms. Of course. Victoria will arrange the meeting details. Mr. Peterson, I want you to know that Pinnacle values institutional knowledge and long-term thinking. We wouldn't make the mistakes that Meridian apparently made with your employment. The meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m. at Pinnacle's offices in the Willis Tower, giving me time to contact my employment attorney and review the legal implications of Meridian's termination decision. The attorney confirmed that termination without cause typically voided non-compete restrictions, though formal analysis would require reviewing all relevant documentation. Pinnacle's offices occupied 3 floors of the Willis Tower, with panoramic views of Chicago's financial district and Lake Michigan beyond. The atmosphere was markedly different from Meridian's corporate stuffiness, younger, more energetic, with an entrepreneurial spirit that suggested rapid decision-making and aggressive growth objectives. Robert Steinberg was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 50 years old, with the intensity of someone who'd built a successful business through calculated risk-taking and competitive intelligence. His questions during our initial meeting were sophisticated, demonstrating deep understanding of algorithmic trading's technical requirements and market applications. Mr. Peterson, let me be direct about our objectives, Steinberg said as we settled into his conference room. Pinnacle manages $15 billion in assets, but our quantitative trading capabilities lag significantly behind firms like Meridian. We've been seeking opportunities to close that gap through strategic hiring and technology development. What specific capabilities are you looking to develop? I asked. Everything that's made Meridian successful in the algorithmic space. High frequency arbitrage, momentum-based strategies, machine learning applications, risk management systems. We want to build a comprehensive platform that can compete directly with the industry leaders. Steinberg's objectives encompassed all areas where I had deep expertise, the same systems that generated hundreds of millions in annual profits for Meridian. Pinnacle was essentially asking me to recreate everything I'd built over 8 years, but without the technological and institutional constraints that had limited Meridian's development. The compensation package would reflect the strategic importance of this initiative, Victoria added. Base salary of $2.8 million annually, plus equity participation and performance bonuses tied to trading profits. Full autonomy over system architecture and development priorities. The offer was extraordinary, nearly 4 times my Meridian salary. With equity upside that could be worth tens of millions if Pinnacle's algorithmic trading division succeeded. More importantly, the role would provide complete creative freedom to build systems without corporate interference or arbitrary cost-cutting initiatives. What timeline are you envisioning for system development? I asked. Aggressive but realistic. Steinberg replied. We understand that building robust trading systems takes time, but we're prepared to invest whatever resources are necessary to accelerate the process. Our objective is to be competitive with Meridian within 18 months. 18 months to recreate systems that had taken 8 years to develop initially. The timeline was ambitious but potentially achievable with adequate resources and without the bureaucratic obstacles that had slowed development at Meridian. Either need to build a team, I said. Algorithmic trading requires specialists in multiple areas: quantitative research, system architecture, risk management, execution optimization. Budget isn't a constraint, Steinberg assured me. Hire whoever you need, offer whatever compensation is required to attract top talent. Pinnacle's partners understand that building world-class capabilities requires world-class investment. The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering technical requirements, organizational structure, and strategic objectives. Steinberg's vision was comprehensive and well-funded, providing everything that Meridian had failed to offer: adequate resources, long-term commitment, and respect for the expertise required to build successful trading systems. By 6 p.m. We'd outlined a preliminary agreement that would make me Pinnacle's chief technology officer with complete authority over quantitative trading development. The legal documentation would take several days to finalize, but the fundamental terms were agreed upon. Mr. Peterson, I want to emphasize that this conversation represents a significant competitive shift in Chicago's financial markets, Steinberg said as our meeting concluded. Pinnacle will become a serious threat to Meridian's algorithmic trading dominance, potentially affecting their market share and profitability substantially. His warning was both acknowledgement and opportunity. Meridian's decision to terminate my employment had created the possibility for dramatic competitive realignment, with consequences that would extend far beyond the immediate cost savings they'd achieved. As I drove home through Chicago's evening traffic, I reflected on the day's events and their potential implications. Meridian had saved my annual salary by forcing my departure, but they'd potentially sacrificed hundreds of millions in competitive advantages by freeing me to work for their primary competitor. The irony was perfect. Cost-cutting initiatives designed to improve short-term profitability could end up costing Meridian their leadership position in the most lucrative segment of their business. My phone buzzed with a text message from Derek. First day went okay, but I'm definitely feeling overwhelmed. Thanks again for all the training. His message was both relief and concern. Derek had survived his initial day of operational responsibility, but his admission of feeling overwhelmed suggested that more challenging situations lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring new market conditions, new algorithmic responses, and new opportunities for the kind of edge cases that required years of experience to handle correctly. Derek would face those challenges with 6 weeks of preparation while I began building systems that would compete directly with the algorithms he was struggling to understand. The real consequences of Meridian's decision were just beginning to unfold. The first sign of trouble came exactly 11 days after I'd started at Pinnacle Capital. I was reviewing architectural plans for our new algorithmic trading platform when my former colleague Marcus Rivera called from Meridian, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Nathan, I know you can't discuss specifics, but something's happening with the momentum algorithms. Derek triggered 3 emergency stops this morning, and he's completely lost. Angela is asking if there's any way to bring you back as a consultant. Through my new office window on the 53rd floor of Willis Tower, I could see Meridian's building in the distance, a concrete monument to the short-sighted decision-making that had created this situation. The emergency stops Marcus mentioned weren't surprising. I'd predicted exactly this scenario during Derek's training. Marcus, you know I can't return even if I wanted to, I replied carefully. Meridian made their choice about my value to the organization. The trading desk is in chaos. Derek understands the basic operations, but when market conditions deviate from normal patterns, he freezes. This morning's volatility caught him completely off guard. The market volatility Marcus referenced was a flash crash in European currencies that had rippled through global trading systems. The algorithms I'd designed were sophisticated enough to navigate such disruptions automatically, but only if the human operator understood when to trust the system's decisions versus when to intervene. What specifically triggered the emergency stops? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Currency arbitrage opportunities that looked too good to be true. Derek was afraid they were false signals, so he shut down the entire FX trading division. Turns out they were legitimate opportunities that would have generated massive profits. Derek's caution was understandable but costly. The arbitrage opportunities he'd identified were likely worth tens of millions in potential profits, money that Meridian had forfeited due to inexperience and fear of making mistakes. How is management responding? Blake is furious. He's demanding explanations for why the systems aren't performing as expected. Angela keeps insisting that you provided adequate training, but the numbers don't lie. Harrison Blake's fury was predictable. CEO compensation was typically tied to quarterly performance metrics, and missed trading opportunities would directly impact his bonus calculations. The cost savings from eliminating my position were already being offset by operational losses. Under Derek's inexperienced management, after ending the call with Marcus, I walked down the hall to update Robert Steinberg on Meridian's developing crisis. Pinnacle's offices buzzed with activity as we recruited top talent from across the financial industry, building a quantitative trading team that would rival any in the world. Meridian's new operator triggered multiple emergency stops today. I reported. They're missing significant profit opportunities due to inexperience with complex market conditions. Steinberg's expression was a mixture of satisfaction and amazement. How much money are we talking about? Based on Marcus's description, probably 40 to 60 million in missed profits just today. The longer Derek operates without adequate support, the more opportunities they'll miss. And how does this affect our timeline for launching competing systems? It gives us additional time to build robust platforms while Meridian struggles with operational stability. Their performance problems will likely continue until they either bring in experienced operators or invest months in additional training. Steinberg nodded thoughtfully. Which means our 18-month development timeline might actually give us first-mover advantage in several market segments. The irony was becoming more pronounced daily. Meridian's cost-cutting initiative was not only compromising their own performance but also providing competitive advantages to Pinnacle that we hadn't anticipated when planning our development strategy. 3 weeks later, the situation at Meridian had deteriorated dramatically. Derek had resigned under pressure after a series of costly mistakes that culminated in a $47 million loss during a treasury bond auction. The loss occurred when he misinterpreted algorithm signals and manually overrode automated trading decisions, exactly the kind of inexperienced intervention I'd warned against during training. Angela Winters called me personally, her previous corporate confidence replaced by desperate urgency. Nathan, I'll be direct. We need your help. Derek's departure has left us without anyone capable of operating the algorithmic trading systems. We're prepared to offer a consulting arrangement with very competitive terms. Her desperation was palpable, but the offer came too late. Even if I'd been inclined to help Meridian recover from their self-inflicted crisis, my commitment to Pinnacle made such arrangements impossible. Angela, I appreciate the call, but I'm not available for consulting work with Meridian. You might consider hiring experienced operators from other firms, though that will obviously be expensive. We've tried. Everyone with relevant experience is either employed by competitors or demanding compensation packages that would eliminate the cost savings from your departure. The hiring challenges Angela described were entirely predictable. Experienced algorithmic trading professionals were rare and expensive, typically earning salaries that exceeded what Meridian had paid me. Finding someone willing to inherit Derek's problematic situation would require even more significant financial incentives. What about the systems themselves? I asked. Are they still operational? That's part of the problem. Without experienced oversight, we've had to disable several of the more complex strategies. We're essentially running basic trading algorithms that generate a fraction of historical profits. Meridian had effectively neutered their most sophisticated capabilities, reducing 8 years of algorithmic development to elementary trading strategies that any competent programmer could implement. The competitive advantages I'd spent nearly a decade building were being abandoned due to operational inexperience. How is Blake responding to the performance decline? Angela's pause was telling. He's exploring strategic alternatives for the algorithmic trading division. There's been discussion about licensing technology from other firms or potentially divesting the entire operation. Strategic alternatives was corporate euphemism for panic. Blake was apparently considering dismantling Meridian's most profitable division rather than investing in the expertise necessary to operate it effectively. The conversation ended with Angela making one final plea for assistance, which I declined politely but firmly. Meridian had created their crisis through short-sighted decision-making, and the consequences were unfolding exactly as I'd predicted during Derek's inadequate training period. Meanwhile, Pinnacle's algorithmic trading development was progressing ahead of schedule. The team I'd assembled included some of the industry's most talented professionals, many of whom had become available as news of Meridian's struggles spread through Chicago's financial community. Lisa Park joined Renaissance Technologies, bringing deep expertise in machine learning applications for financial markets. David Kumar left Goldman Sachs to lead our execution optimization efforts. Sarah Williams relocated from 2 Sigma to head our risk management development. Each new hire brought not only individual expertise but also institutional knowledge from the world's most successful quantitative trading firms. The combination of talent and experience was creating development momentum that exceeded my most optimistic projections. Nathan, this team is extraordinary, Victoria Chen observed during one of our weekly progress meetings. The intellectual firepower we've assembled is probably unmatched anywhere in the industry. She was right. Pinnacle's algorithmic trading division now included former senior professionals from Renaissance, 2 Sigma, Citadel, and D.E. Shaw, firms that collectively managed hundreds of billions in assets and generated tens of billions in annual profits. More importantly, I replied, everyone understands that we're building something from scratch with complete creative freedom. No legacy systems, no bureaucratic constraints, no arbitrary cost-cutting initiatives. The development environment at Pinnacle was everything that Meridian had failed to provide. Unlimited resources, long-term thinking, and genuine appreciation for the expertise required to build world-class trading systems. 6 months after joining Pinnacle, our first algorithmic trading strategies went live in limited market testing. The initial results exceeded all expectations, with profit margins that rivaled the best-performing systems at established firms. More importantly, the architecture we'd created was scalable and robust, designed to handle the kind of complex market conditions that had overwhelmed Derek at Meridian. The market reception of Pinnacle's entry into algorithmic trading was immediate and dramatic. Institutional investors who had allocated capital exclusively to established firms began exploring opportunities with our new platform. The combination of proven expertise and innovative technology was attracting attention from pension funds, endowments, and sovereign wealth funds. Robert Steinberg was ecstatic about the early performance metrics. Nathan, these results are extraordinary. We're generating profits that some firms take years to achieve, and we've been operational for less than 6 months. The success was gratifying but not surprising. Building systems from scratch allowed us to incorporate lessons learned from decades of collective experience across multiple firms. We could avoid the architectural mistakes and legacy constraints that limited performance at older organizations. The real test will come during major market disruptions, I cautioned. Our systems are designed to handle volatility and unexpected conditions, but we haven't experienced a genuine crisis yet. The test came sooner than expected. A geopolitical crisis in Eastern Europe triggered massive market volatility that challenged trading systems worldwide. Many algorithmic platforms experienced significant losses as their models failed to adapt to rapidly changing conditions. Pinnacle systems not only survived the crisis but generated substantial profits by correctly identifying opportunities that other firms missed. The robust architecture and sophisticated risk management protocols we developed proved their value during exactly the kind of market stress that separated successful platforms from expensive failures. The crisis performance attracted global attention to Pinnacle's algorithmic trading capabilities. Financial publications featured articles about our rapid development and exceptional results. Institutional investors increased their allocations significantly, providing additional capital for platform expansion. Meanwhile, Meridian's struggles continued to worsen. The same geopolitical crisis that had showcased Pinnacle's capabilities exposed the limitations of Meridian's degraded systems. Operating with elementary algorithms and inexperienced oversight, they suffered significant losses during the market volatility. Industry publications began questioning Meridian's long-term viability in algorithmic trading. Client redemptions accelerated as institutional investors lost confidence in the firm's technological capabilities. Harrison Blake was eventually forced to announce the closure of Meridian's quantitative trading division, terminating hundreds of employees and surrendering billions in managed assets. The final irony came when Pinnacle acquired Meridian's remaining algorithmic trading assets for a fraction of their original value. The systems I'd built over 8 years, worth hundreds of millions in annual profits, were purchased for less than $50 million due to Meridian's operational failures and client departures. "Nathan, I have to ask," Robert Steinberg said, as we reviewed the acquisition documents. "Did you anticipate this outcome when you made the decision to join Pinnacle?" I thought carefully about his question, reflecting on the chain of events that had led from my termination to Meridian's collapse and Pinnacle's dominance in algorithmic trading. I knew that replacing experienced operators with inexperienced ones would create operational risks, I replied. But I didn't anticipate that Meridian's leadership would double down on poor decisions rather than acknowledging their mistakes and correcting course. The financial impact is staggering. Meridian lost approximately $1.5 billion in market value. Since your departure, between missed trading opportunities, client redemptions, and eventual asset sales. Steinberg's calculation was conservative if anything. The direct losses from operational failures, combined with the competitive advantages that had transferred to Pinnacle, represented one of the most expensive corporate decisions in Chicago's financial history. What's remarkable, I continued, is that all of this could have been avoided with better decision-making. Extending Derek's training timeline by 6 months would have cost maybe $300,000 in additional salary. Instead, they chose to save money in the short term and lost over $1 billion in long-term value. The conversation was interrupted by Victoria Chen, who entered Steinberg's office with champagne and a broad smile. "I thought you both should know that we just received confirmation from CalPERS. They're allocating $5 billion to our algorithmic trading platform, the largest single commitment in Pinnacle's history." The CalPERS allocation represented validation from one of the world's most sophisticated institutional investors. Their due diligence process was exhaustive, and their commitment signaled confidence in Pinnacle's long-term capabilities and performance prospects. As we celebrated the achievement, I reflected on the journey from forced unemployment to building one of the industry's most successful algorithmic trading platforms. Meridian's short-sighted cost-cutting had created opportunities that exceeded anything I could have imagined while sitting in Angela Winter's office 18 months earlier. The final chapter of the story was written 3 months later when Harrison Blake announced his resignation as Meridian's CEO. The board's statement cited strategic challenges and operational difficulties as factors in his departure. Corporate euphemism for the catastrophic consequences of his cost-cutting initiatives. Blake's replacement was Victoria Chen, who left Pinnacle to lead Meridian's attempted recovery. Her first decision as CEO was attempting to recruit me back to rebuild the algorithmic trading division that Blake had destroyed. The offer was extraordinary: CEO-level compensation, complete autonomy, and unlimited resources to recreate the systems that had once made Meridian dominant in quantitative trading. But the opportunity came far too late and from a position of weakness rather than strength. "Victoria, I appreciate the offer, but my commitment is to Pinnacle," I told her during our lunch meeting at the Chicago Club. Meridian had the opportunity to value my contributions appropriately, and they chose a different path. "I understand, though I had to try. What Blake did to you was corporate malpractice, and the consequences have been devastating for everyone involved." Her acknowledgement was gratifying but unnecessary. The market had already rendered its verdict on Meridian's decision-making, and that verdict was unambiguous. As I walked back to Pinnacle's offices after lunch, I passed Meridian's headquarters building. The once imposing structure now housed a significantly smaller organization, with entire floors vacant due to the downsizing that had followed their algorithmic trading collapse. The building served as a monument to the consequences of treating expertise as expendable and institutional knowledge as replaceable. Meridian had saved my annual salary by forcing my departure, but they'd ultimately paid over $1 billion for that decision through lost opportunities, operational failures, and competitive disadvantages. The lesson was simple but apparently difficult for corporate leadership to understand. Some savings are too expensive to afford, and some decisions have consequences that extend far beyond their immediate financial impact. That evening, I sat in my Pinnacle office reviewing the day's trading results. Our algorithms had generated another exceptional day of profits, continuing the consistent performance that was establishing our platform as an industry leader. My phone buzzed with a text message from Derek Walsh, whom I'd stayed in touch with occasionally since his departure from Meridian. Saw the news about Pinnacle's CalPERS deal. Congratulations on building something amazing. Sorry about how everything went down at Meridian. His message was a reminder that the real victims of Meridian's poor decision-making weren't the executives who'd made those decisions, but the talented professionals like Derek who'd been set up for failure through inadequate support and unrealistic expectations. I replied, "Thanks, Derek. You were put in an impossible situation. Hope your new role is working out better." He'd found a position at a smaller quantitative fund where he could develop his skills gradually with proper mentorship and reasonable expectations. His experience at Meridian had been traumatic but educational, teaching him valuable lessons about the importance of adequate preparation and institutional support. As Chicago's skyline lit up in the darkness beyond my office windows, I reflected on the chain of events that had transformed my forced departure from Meridian into the foundation for Pinnacle's remarkable success. The call I'd made to Victoria Chen 18 months earlier had indeed cost Meridian $1.5 billion, but more than that, it had demonstrated the difference between organizations that value expertise and those that treat it as expendable. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones that could have been avoided entirely through better judgment and long-term thinking. Meridian had learned that lesson the hard way, and the consequences would affect their organization for years to come. But for Pinnacle Capital and the team we'd built, the future had never looked brighter. We'd created something extraordinary from the ashes of corporate short-sightedness, proving that talent and expertise will always find ways to flourish, even when they're not appreciated where they currently reside. The best revenge, as they say, is massive success. And by that measure, our revenge was complete. 2 years after that fateful phone call to Victoria Chen, I stood before the Federal Reserve's Financial Stability Oversight Council in Washington, D.C., testifying about algorithmic trading practices and market stability. The irony wasn't lost on me that Meridian's spectacular collapse had become a case study in how corporate mismanagement could create systemic risks in financial markets. "Mr. Peterson," asked Chairwoman Elizabeth Morrison, "in your expert opinion, what lessons should the financial industry learn from the Meridian Industries incident?" I glanced at the packed hearing room, filled with reporters, industry executives, and regulatory officials. In the front row sat Angela Winters, now working as a compliance consultant after her termination from Meridian's smoking wreckage. 2 seats away, Harrison Blake watched with the hollow expression of someone whose legacy had become a cautionary tale. "Chairwoman Morrison, the Meridian case demonstrates that institutional knowledge in financial technology isn't just an asset. It's a critical infrastructure component," I began. "When organizations treat experienced professionals as interchangeable commodities, they create vulnerabilities that extend far beyond their own operations." The testimony was part of a broader investigation into how Meridian's algorithmic trading collapse had triggered panic selling across multiple markets, requiring emergency Federal Reserve intervention to prevent a broader financial crisis. What had begun as a cost-cutting initiative at one firm had nearly destabilized global currency markets. The cascade of events started 6 months after Meridian's quantitative trading division closure, when their desperate attempts to remain relevant led them to purchase off-the-shelf algorithmic trading software from a European vendor. The software was poorly integrated with their existing systems and lacked the sophisticated risk management protocols that my original architecture had included. During a routine treasury auction, the European software misinterpreted market signals and began executing massive sell orders that other algorithmic systems interpreted as insider information about economic policy changes. Within minutes, automated trading platforms across the industry were amplifying the selling pressure, creating a feedback loop that threatened to crash the dollar. The Federal Reserve's emergency intervention prevented catastrophe. But the incident had exposed how interconnected modern financial markets had become and how quickly problems at one institution could spread globally. Meridian's collapse wasn't just a corporate failure, it had become a systemic risk that required government intervention. The technical specifics are complex, I continued my testimony, but the fundamental lesson is simple: expertise in financial technology requires years to develop and cannot be rapidly transferred or easily replaced. Organizations that fail to recognize this reality create risks that extend far beyond their own balance sheets. Senator Patricia Rodriguez from California leaned forward. "Mr. Peterson, some critics argue that your departure to a competitor directly contributed to Meridian's instability. How do you respond to suggestions that experienced professionals have obligations to maintain continuity even when treated poorly by their employers?" The question was pointed but not unexpected. Industry publications had debated the ethics of My transition to Pinnacle, with some arguing that key personnel had responsibilities that transcended employment relationships. Senator Rodriguez, I would respectfully disagree with that characterization, I replied. Meridian made a deliberate decision to terminate my employment and replace me with someone they knew was inadequately prepared. They prioritized short-term cost savings over operational stability, despite clear warnings about the risks involved. I paused, ensuring my next words were measured and clear. No employee, regardless of expertise level, has an obligation to remain with an organization that doesn't value their contributions. The responsibility for continuity planning rests with management, not with individual professionals. The hearing continued for 3 hours, covering technical aspects of algorithmic trading, regulatory oversight challenges, and policy recommendations for preventing similar incidents. My testimony emphasized the need for industry standards around personnel transitions and expertise requirements for critical financial systems. After the hearing, I walked through Washington's autumn afternoon toward Union Station, reflecting on how far the story had traveled from that Friday email in Angela Winter's office. What had begun as personal employment drama had become a regulatory case study and congressional hearing topic. My phone buzzed with a call from Robert Steinberg. Nathan, I watched the hearing online. Outstanding testimony. You've positioned yourself as the definitive expert on algorithmic trading risk management. The recognition was gratifying but secondary to Pinnacle's continued success. Our algorithmic trading platform now managed over $47 billion in assets, making us one of the largest quantitative investment firms in the world. The expertise that Meridian had deemed expendable was generating profits that exceeded their entire market capitalization at its peak. The hearing was necessary, I replied. The Meridian incident could have been much worse if the Fed hadn't intervened quickly. The industry needs to understand that these systems require genuine expertise, not just mathematical competence. Speaking of expertise, I have news that might interest you. Meridian just announced they're liquidating their remaining assets and ceasing operations entirely. Victoria Chen resigned as CEO this morning. Meridian's final collapse wasn't surprising, but the timeline was faster than I'd anticipated. The Treasury auction incident had triggered client departures, regulatory investigations, and insurance claims that proved insurmountable for the weakened organization. What about their employees? I asked. There are still good people there who weren't responsible for management's decisions. We're already in discussions with several of their former research staff. The quantitative analysis team has some talented professionals who could contribute to our continued expansion. The conversation reminded me that corporate failures always affected innocent employees who had no control over executive decision-making. Meridian's collapse would eliminate hundreds of jobs, from administrative staff to senior analysts who'd built careers around the firm's reputation. That evening, I attended a dinner hosted by the American Finance Association at the Willard Hotel, where industry leaders discussed the implications of the congressional hearing and broader regulatory trends. The gathering included CEOs from major investment firms, Federal Reserve officials, and academic researchers who studied financial market stability. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from MIT Sloan School approached during the cocktail reception. Nathan, your testimony today was fascinating. I'm working on a case study about organizational knowledge management in financial services. Would you be willing to discuss the Meridian situation from an academic perspective? Academic analysis of the Meridian collapse was inevitable, given its implications for corporate governance and risk management theory. The case would likely be taught in business schools for decades as an example of how short-sighted cost-cutting could destroy organizational value. I'd be happy to contribute to academic research, I replied. The lessons from this situation extend beyond financial services to any industry that depends on specialized expertise. Dr. Walsh's research was part of a broader academic interest in the Meridian case. Harvard Business School was developing a comprehensive case study, Stanford's Graduate School of Business was examining the risk management implications, and Wharton was analyzing the competitive dynamics that had transferred market share to Pinnacle. The academic attention reflected the case's significance beyond typical corporate failure stories. Meridian's collapse had demonstrated how quickly competitive advantages could shift in technology-dependent industries, particularly when organizations failed to value the expertise that created those advantages. 2 weeks later, I was back in Chicago for Pinnacle's annual investor meeting, where we would present performance results that exceeded even our most optimistic projections. The algorithmic trading platform had generated net returns of 34.7% for the year, performance that placed us among the most successful investment firms globally. The investor meeting was held at the Four Seasons, with presentations to pension fund managers, endowment officials, and sovereign wealth fund representatives who collectively controlled trillions in assets. The audience included some of the most sophisticated institutional investors in the world, people who understood both the technical complexities and competitive advantages of algorithmic trading. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Steinberg began. His opening remarks: 3 years ago, Pinnacle Capital Management was a traditional hedge fund with limited technological capabilities. Today, we operate one of the world's most advanced algorithmic trading platforms, generating returns that demonstrate the value of genuine expertise combined with innovative technology. The presentation covered technical achievements, performance metrics, and strategic objectives for continued growth. But the subtext was clear: Pinnacle had succeeded by recognizing and rewarding expertise that other organizations had undervalued. During the question and answer session, Margaret Foster from the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan asked about competitive sustainability. Mr. Peterson, algorithmic trading is becoming increasingly competitive. How do you maintain performance advantages as more firms enter the space? The question addressed a fundamental challenge in quantitative investing. As more organizations developed algorithmic capabilities, traditional advantages could erode quickly unless continuously enhanced through innovation and expertise. Ms. Foster, sustainable competitive advantage in algorithmic trading comes from combining 3 elements: technological innovation, deep market understanding, and operational excellence, I replied. Many firms can replicate individual components, but few can integrate all 3 effectively over extended periods. I continued, our advantage isn't just in the algorithms themselves, but in the institutional knowledge about how to adapt those algorithms to changing market conditions. That expertise can't be purchased or easily replicated, it must be developed through years of experience in live trading environments. The answer emphasized why Meridian's approach had been so fundamentally flawed. They'd assumed that algorithmic trading was simply a matter of running computer programs, failing to understand that successful implementation required deep expertise in both technology and market dynamics. After the investor meeting, I walked along Chicago's lakefront, processing the remarkable transformation that had occurred since my termination from Meridian. The city skyline looked different now, with Pinnacle's success providing a new perspective on opportunities and possibilities. My phone rang with a call from Derek Walsh, whom I'd been mentoring informally since his departure from Meridian. He'd found success at a smaller quantitative fund and was considering starting his own firm with several former colleagues. Nathan, I wanted to thank you again for the guidance over the past year, Derek said. The situation at Meridian was traumatic, but it taught me invaluable lessons about the importance of proper preparation and institutional support. Derek's growth since leaving Meridian had been remarkable. The experience of being thrown into operational responsibility without adequate preparation had motivated him to develop genuine expertise rather than relying on theoretical knowledge alone. Derek, you've turned a difficult situation into a learning opportunity, I replied. That kind of resilience and self-reflection will serve you well in whatever you choose to do next. I've been thinking about our conversations regarding corporate culture and employee development. If I do start my own firm, I want to build an organization that values expertise and provides proper mentorship for younger professionals. His commitment to creating better organizational practices was encouraging. The lessons from Meridian's failure were influencing a new generation of financial professionals who understood the importance of valuing expertise and supporting employee development. 6 months later, the final chapter of the Meridian story was written when the Securities and Exchange Commission released its investigation report into the firm's collapse. The 847-page document detailed a cascade of poor decisions, inadequate risk management, and regulatory violations that had transformed a respected investment firm into a cautionary tale. The SEC's findings were damning but unsurprising. Harrison Blake's cost-cutting initiatives had eliminated not just personnel but also the institutional safeguards that prevented catastrophic losses. The replacement of experienced professionals with inexperienced operators had created exactly the risks that regulatory frameworks were designed to prevent. The Meridian Industries case demonstrates how rapidly institutional capabilities can deteriorate when organizations fail to maintain adequate expertise in critical operational areas, wrote SEC Chair Patricia Williams in the report's executive summary. The firm's collapse resulted not from market forces or external shocks, but from internal management decisions that prioritized short-term cost reduction over long-term stability. The SEC report recommended new regulatory requirements for firms engaged in algorithmic trading, including minimum experience standards for key personnel and mandatory risk management protocols. The regulations would prevent other organizations from making the same mistakes that had destroyed Meridian. That evening, I was at home in Lincoln Park, reviewing architectural plans for Pinnacle's new headquarters building, when Angela Winters called. I hadn't spoken with her since the congressional hearing, and her voice carried a weariness that suggested the past few years had been difficult. "Nathan, I know this call might seem strange, but I wanted to apologize for my role in what happened at Meridian," she said. "I was following executive directives, but I should have pushed back more forcefully against the unrealistic timeline for Derek's transition." Her apology was unexpected but appreciated. Angela had been caught between executive mandates and operational realities, trying to implement decisions that she likely knew were problematic. "Angela, you were in an impossible position," I replied. "The decisions that destroyed Meridian came from the executive level, not from HR implementation." "I've been thinking about that period a lot lately," she continued. "The cost savings from your termination were maybe $400,000 annually. The losses that resulted exceeded $1.5 billion. It's the most expensive personnel decision in corporate history." Her calculation was accurate and stark. Meridian's leadership had destroyed billions in shareholder value to save hundreds of thousands in salary costs, a ratio that would be studied in business schools as an example of catastrophically poor judgment. "The real tragedy," I said, "is that none of it was necessary. Extending Derek's training timeline or maintaining dual coverage during the transition would have cost minimal amounts compared to the consequences of rushing the process." "I know. And Derek was such a talented person who deserved better than being set up for failure." "Have you stayed in touch with him?" "We talk occasionally. He's doing well at his new firm and learning the business properly this time." The experience was traumatic but ultimately educational. Our conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering the regulatory changes, industry lessons, and personal impacts of Meridian's collapse. Angela was working as a compliance consultant now, helping other firms avoid the mistakes that had destroyed her former employer. As I hung up the phone, I reflected on the complete arc of the story that had begun with Derek's inadequate training and culminated in congressional testimony about systemic financial risks. What had seemed like a personal employment dispute had revealed fundamental flaws in how organizations valued expertise and managed transitions. The following morning brought news that Derek Walsh had indeed started his own quantitative investment firm, raising $200 million in initial capital from institutional investors who were impressed with his approach to employee development and risk management. His firm's founding principles explicitly emphasized proper training, mentorship, and long-term thinking, direct responses to the lessons learned from Meridian's failure. "Nathan, I wanted you to be among the first to know about the new firm." Derek called to share the announcement. "Walsh Capital Management will focus on developing algorithmic trading capabilities through proper expertise development rather than shortcuts or cost-cutting." His success was gratifying proof that the Meridian experience had produced positive outcomes despite its traumatic nature. Derek had transformed personal failure into institutional wisdom, creating an organization designed to avoid the mistakes that had destroyed his previous employer. 3 years after that initial phone call to Victoria Chen, I stood in Pinnacle's new headquarters, looking out over Lake Michigan while reviewing performance reports that confirmed our position as one of the world's most successful algorithmic trading firms. The view from the 68th floor encompassed the entire Chicago skyline, including the building where Meridian had once operated. The empty space where Meridian's offices had been served as a reminder of how quickly corporate fortunes could change when organizations failed to value the expertise that created their competitive advantages. In an industry measured by quarterly performance, Meridian's collapse had been swift and decisive, but the real story wasn't about corporate failure or competitive victory. It was about the importance of recognizing that genuine expertise takes years to develop and cannot be easily transferred or quickly replaced. Organizations that understand this reality create sustainable competitive advantages, while those that don't create vulnerabilities that can destroy decades of accumulated value. The phone call I'd made to Victoria Chen had indeed cost Meridian $1.5 billion, but more than that, it had demonstrated that talent and expertise will always find opportunities to flourish, even when they're not appreciated where they currently reside. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones that could have been avoided entirely through better judgment and respect for the knowledge that creates competitive advantages. Meridian had learned that lesson too late, and the consequences had affected not just their organization but the broader financial industry. As I watched the sunset paint Lake Michigan in shades of gold and crimson, I realized that the best outcomes often emerge from the worst circumstances, provided you have the courage to recognize opportunities when they present themselves and the wisdom to build something better from the ashes of others' poor decisions. The story that began with training my replacement had ended with building an industry-leading organization that proved expertise and institutional knowledge are indeed irreplaceable assets. That's a lesson worth $1.5 billion, and one that will influence corporate decision-making for generations to come. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.